Pope Francis, the leader of the Catholic Church, has died. Francis was brought in to be a change agent and clean up a church sullied by scandal.
He became known as a progressive reformer, urging both Catholics and others to refrain from judgment and to focus on care for the marginalised.
I'm Michelle Stockman.
And I'm Jared Reid.
And this is News Desk. And today, we're going to look at the People's Pope, Francis, why he was admired by so many, Catholic and not, and despite or because of his efforts as a changemaker, the divided church he leaves behind.
The Vatican has announced the death of Pope Francis.
Well, he was, in fact, a very unusual pope.
Very sad day because today died the Pope Francis.
Gloria in excelsis Deo. I remember those words from Christmas carols.
Yeah.
I think a way, glory to God in the highest.
Glory to God in the highest,
Right,
yeah.
A way to honor Pope Francis as many people around the world mourn him this week after his death. And beyond looking at his legacy, we're also going to look at the challenges that await the next pope, whoever that may be, especially as the Catholic Church is facing a growing divide on social values between the global north and the global south.
That's right. And I'll be bringing your questions and comments into the discussion today and putting them to our experts. And thank you to some of the people who've already commented on our community post. I'm going to read a couple out to you. Someone's written, I'm not even Catholic or even remotely religious, but I do hope that the next Pope does great works. Someone else wrote, Papa Francesco was a man of the people. And also a lot of speculation about which kind of directions the next Pope is going to take the Catholic Church into. Someone's written, the next one will be extreme far left. So that's one opinion. And someone else has written, the goal of the Pope is to protect and to uphold religion and the Church's core values and principles, something we're going to get into in a little bit, and protect it from distortion by anti-church progressives in the West.
Wow, I cannot wait to dig into these comments, to talk about them, and to help us do that around the big table today. We've got some wonderful voices. We've got Bernd Riegert, who is a DW correspondent, who has covered the Pope on several visits that he's made around Europe. And then we've also got Michaela Kavanagh, who is our DW reporter, who is looking into what's really happened over the past week since, not really the week, but the past few days since the Pope has died, and how people are reacting around the world.
That's right.
That's right. And then over here, we have got Cherry Chan. Cherry in the chat, Chan.
Of course. You've all seen me in the chat already. And with me, I bring a poll question as usual every week. This week, we are asking, let me find the poll question here. What role should the Pope play in politics? There are four answers. Stay out completely. Speak on moral issues only, mediate in global conflicts, and call out abuse of power. So don't forget to vote. You can find it on top of the chat box, and we will talk about the results later.
That's right. Because the Pope is more than just an ecclesiastical leader. He also is a political figure. So please tell us what you think, how the Pope should play a role in politics.
We've had one comment already, Carolina. Hi, Carolina, one of our favourite viewers. She's written, the Pope must be apolitical. So let us know if you agree with her or if you have another perspective.
Yes, everybody keep Carolina awake. She's tired, so keep the conversation good so she stays tuned. All right. So let's go over to Michaela, and can you catch us up to what's been happening?
To what's been happening, yeah. So it's been an eventful few days.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, first of all, let's go back in time. Let's go back to mid-February.
Can I just comment? Oh, sorry. Well, you're going back to February, but I just want to say, like, it was just the day after Easter, I got a push notification on my phone that the Pope had died. So really, it did seem that he wanted to be there for a very holy day in Christianity.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that was my first thought as well. It was, just the day before I was in the newsroom and we were working and we saw, him speaking to, him addressing, we'll get to that later, him addressing St. Peter's Square, and I thought, here he is. It's a miracle. And yeah, just a day later, I really had the feeling when I saw the news that I felt it was quite moving for him to have waited until he was able to sort of address people and then, anyway. But to start us off, let's go back to mid-February when this all sort of kicked off. So the Pope fell ill in about mid-February, February 14th. He was hospitalized with what I think was at first bronchitis and then sort of became double pneumonia of both lungs. So he had two sort of respiratory crises during that time where he was quite close. But so he was in the hospital for about 5 weeks, getting round-the-clock care, getting treatment, and then just a few weeks ago he was out and he had made a recovery. And so, yeah, you know, doctors called it a miracle, and after he was discharged, he sort of immediately defied the doctor's orders to stay isolated, to keep his immune system safe, to, you know, rest up at home alone.
Because this is a guy who has basically said, I refuse to retire.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, he was.
No matter what.
It was, you know, full steam ahead, even very much in sickness and in health. And so one cardinal close to the Pope even distinguished between what I think is interesting, healing and resting. And he said what the Pope found healing was to be out with the people. And so that brings us back to the sort of the 24 hours before his death, or you know, the last few days before his death. On Maundy Thursday, or on Holy Thursday, he visited a prison in Rome, and that was sort of a hearkening back to what...
And just
and
people who are just
seeing
listening,
this. Yeah.
Can you talk us through these pictures, what we're seeing, Michaela?
Okay, so what we're seeing here is the Pope who is visiting a prison in Rome. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but it's loud, loud applause, very happy cheers from the inmates there. He's signing books and he's getting lots of kisses on his hands. And this extends for quite a while, we'll see. And so this is sort of a return to, this is something that the Pope has done almost every Holy Thursday. He visits incarcerated people, he, you know, pays their respects. In fact, you know, we talked earlier about how 15 days after he was elected Pope in 2013, it was his first sort of outing was to host Mass at a juvenile detention center where he kissed the feet of incarcerated youth, including women.
I think that sent such a signal of where he wanted his papacy to go, the vision for his papacy. He could have gone anywhere. He could have gone to meet world dignitaries, but he chose to meet some of the most sidelined people in the world, prisoners. And I think that said a lot about his emphasis on pastoral care, right?
That's it.
That's
and,
where he wanted
you
to go.
know, and then we saw that play out over the course of his papacy, over the course of his term. So I think it's it's very meaningful for him to be able to, even, you know, just a few days before his death, have been able to return to where perhaps he felt most comfortable or what felt most meaningful for him.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone's written the Pope should be fearless and kind, and I guess that sort of exemplifies what he was.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, here he goes again. So that was on the Thursday, and then so we're in Holy Week, right? It's Easter week, and then on the Easter Sunday, this is when I think we were all sort of. I'm not sure how many of others were working in the newsroom, but I was so surprised to see the Pope. He was out on St. Peter's Square greeting the congregants after the Mass. He had. I don't want to say outsourced, but asked someone else, another cardinal, to take over his Easter address. And that Easter address was, you know, all about putting an end to violence, to war. And then, he just gave a very simple, very brief Easter greeting saying Happy Easter to all of the congregants there. You could tell, or it looked as though he was quite, it cost him a lot to be able to speak. Yeah, here it is. And, you know, he's got the microphone being held for him. But to massive cheers. So, and then after this, he took a sort of short little spin in the Pope Mobile to greet the public. And so I think we were all thinking the Pope is back. And then just after that, it was a very eventful Easter Sunday for Pope Francis. Just after that, he had a drop-in visitor, J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance popped in for...
Who is Catholic,
who is a recent convert. And they exchanged Easter greetings through a translator. The Pope offered him some gifts for his children, some like little Easter eggs for his kids.
Kinder eggs.
Oh, they were Kinder eggs. Okay, the German angle. schedule, I see. Yeah, and so that meeting lasted just a few minutes. And it was very much J.D. Vance sort of paying his respects to the Pope.
Yeah, we can see the Kinder eggs here.
There it is.
So
there
they
the
are.
Kinder eggs. But they've had a feud recently because didn't J.D. Vance use a Catholic, I can't remember exact wording, but he basically tried to justify like Trump's stance on migrants as part of Catholic doctrine to look after yourself and your family first before you look after others. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's it. And so, you know, I think that's really important context for this visit was this had come after a very public sort of, I guess, a level of antagonism between the Pope and between J.D. Vance about the U.S.'s immigration policies. And in fact, the day before this visit between the Pope and J.D. Vance, J.D. Vance met with a representative the Vatican Secretary of State, and the Vatican said of that meeting that there had been an exchange of opinions over migrants and refugees. So I'm sure that's
so it's been a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Been like, is that code for J.D. Vance was given a lecture? Do you think, Bernd, or?
Well, the specific incidents, the Pope rebuked what J.D. Vance was talking about. J.D. Vance came up with a kind of a hierarchy of love, somehow enshrined in Catholic theology, and the Pope said, "Excuse my friend, that's bullshit." I mean, that was really nothing that the Pope could support, and he has a long row with the Trump administration, also with the first Trump administration, about migrant policies, and I don't think that in his last days he actually was willing to give in to demands from J.D. Vance or something like that. That would not have been his style, actually. And in this last days, he also visited the places where he would bury it. He actually prepared for his death. That's what, for example, his personal nurse is saying now, who was with him all these days. He went to Santa Maria Maggiore, the place where he will be buried on Saturday. He saw his grave, actually, being prepared. And he went to the Basilica St. Peter's, exactly to that spot where his coffin is lying today. So he was kind of, you know, already somehow presuming or preparing what would happen.
Okay.
So what's been the reaction? Sorry. So let me back up. J.D. Vance comes to visit. What happens next?
Well, unfortunately, just a few hours go by. So J.D. Vance visits in the afternoon of the Sunday, and then on Monday morning at 7:30, we get the news from the Vatican saying the Pope has passed early this morning. I think we got the note. The Pope passed at 7:30 maybe, and we got the news a little later.
I think it was about 2 hours later, just a bit over 2 hours later.
Okay, 2 hours
we
later.
found out.
That's right. Yeah, it was mid-morning. Yeah. And so it was a stroke, I believe, and then he fell into a coma. So, you know, it was... the Vatican has said that it was painless and fast and sort of what would have been hoped for as far as the death can go. And
how
so
have people been reacting to hearing that news?
So I think it was quite a shock for many because we saw him just 1 day ago. So, I mean, we do have a few photos that we can pull up about from. Hang on, let me pull this up here. From sort of around the world mourners.
Yeah, I think we're gonna pull up photos.
Here we go.
In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, around the world, people gathering to remember him.
Yeah. So here we have. This is Pope Francis's hometown. This is Buenos Aires, Argentina. Paying their respects there, and then.
Well, there are how many Catholics around the world? 1.3
to 1.4 billion.
The largest Christian denomination in the world. Right.
It's a big crowd. And already in Buenos Aires, his favorite football club started to name the stadium after him. So the honoring is already taking place.
Wow, that didn't take long.
Well, it's not done yet. There's some red tape, but they're about to do it.
Yeah, and we have getting a lot of comments from people paying tribute to Pope Francis. Someone's written, "We've lost a great person and a great voice. I hope the direction he was pushing in continues," something we're going to be talking about shortly with one of our guests. And also, I'm grateful we had Pope Francis, who was broad-minded on sensitive issues. Also, again, some of those sensitive issues we're going to be speaking about shortly. Thank you very much. Please do keep your questions and comments coming in.
That's right. And as you said, Jared, we are going to have a guest that will join us a little bit later talking about Francis's legacy. He worked with Francis. This is Stan Chu Ilo, and he is both an associate professor of African Christianity at DePaul University, as well as an ordained Catholic priest. He was ordained in his home country of Nigeria, so he'll be joining us a little bit. So, keep on watching, keep on asking your questions, stay tuned for him. But first, we're going to go a little bit more in depth into Pope Francis's legacy and why he was seen as such a change maker, a progressive pope, one that we hadn't seen the like of before. So let's go to you, Bernd. What I want to ask is, right from the start, we saw Pope Francis making some very symbolic visits. We talked about his visit to the prison. And then he made his first visit outside of the Vatican City, Rome area, to Lampedusa, which is an island outside of Italy. And if you can play the tape there, Dustin, we've got some footage of that visit. And for those of you who are just listening, we've got the Pope. He's on a big white boat, and he is then being escorted by his security team on jet skis. And he's going over to basically a dock where migrants who are trying to escape into the EU and landed on this island of Lampedusa in Italy. He goes out to meet them, and he threw out a wreath to honor migrants who had died in the journey to get there. So, Bernd, what is the symbolic meaning that this was his very first visit as a pope?
Well, the Mediterranean is still the deadliest route for migrants to come to Europe, and he wanted to point at this fact that he says Europe is ignorant towards this ongoing crisis, and it's still ongoing even after the 12 years of the Pope. I mean, he started out with visiting Lampedusa to point the finger at this, and he was always, during his papers, talking about migrants and migration issues, always saying you have to be open for migrants, you cannot build walls. That was directed at the first Trump administration, who started with the wall on the Mexican border. He actually also visited the Mexican border from the Mexican side.
We've got some footage of that. Dustin, can you play that while we keep on talking?
And then later he went on to Moria in Greece, where I also was, and we met him there. And he was very open. He didn't give anything on protocol, anything. He just walked into that camp, opened a door and talked to the people, and his security was really frightened that something would happen, but it didn't, of course. And he was very, very open to these people, and you could feel that he was kind of feeling like a priest, herding his flock as a shepherd. That was his inner calling, was to be a shepherd, actually. He didn't see himself as somebody who was governing 1.3 billion people. He was always there for the person right in front of him. That was unusual about him, and that was his approach actually to lead the church. He was not a theologist like his predecessor, Benedict XVI, who liked to be a professor. He wrote books and gave lectures and stuff like that. Francis didn't do that, actually. He also wrote some books or some forewords for books, but he was not a theologist in chief like other popes before him. So he was a different kind, a very unusual pope.
Do you mean, like, when you say unusual, more kind of hands-on when it comes to the things?
Yeah, he was hands-on. And
the way I'm understanding it is he didn't want to be top-down, telling people this is what you should do, more like what needs do you have, how can I meet them?
And he said the mission of the church is to be there for the people, to go to the edges of society, as he said, that to refugees, to people who don't have money, to prostitutes, to incarcerated people, and also to the edges of the world, actually, to people who were so far not regarded by the Catholic Church because they were living in the Amazon or in some remote island or something like that. So that's why he went out and said, this all belongs to the church and we have to talk to them. Yeah, there was a different approach, and he also changed the way how the Catholic Church communicated with its members, actually. He tried to have more, to listen to normal or ordinary Catholics. He also started some synods where he invited ordinary Catholics and bishops from around the world to come up with some reform plans. on the other hand, you have to say he initiated a lot of reforms on many fields, but in the end, it was not very consequential because he never took decisions actually at the end. And as it stands now, the canon law, the church law, has not changed much under his reign. And the teachings of the Catholic Church are still, or more or less, not in every field, but they are in many fields still the same like they were in 2013.
Yeah, this is a debatable legacy. Did his example really move things in a different direction? He did say that he wanted the Catholic Church, the way he saw it, was that the church should be as a field hospital after a battle. So he wanted to be there where people were hurting and succor their wounds, both spiritually, physically, as needed. And so how, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but looking back at other past pontiffs, how much was this a departure from the direction of the Catholic Church to be more about pastoral care rather than doctrinaire?
Well, if you view it from the inside of the Curia, for example, they were scared. They were really shocked when Pope Francis started his mission, because the Curia was used to have the power and the money, and to have to safeguard all the things that the Catholic Church amassed over the centuries. And now there was a pope who said the Church has to be poor. The Holy Mother Church is poor, and we have to be there for the poor. So you can imagine that all these old men sitting in the Vatican were a little bit scared what would happen now. He also renamed the ministry. He changed a lot of the leading heads, and now just recently he also appointed 2 women actually to lead positions in the Vatican, which is also new. Well, he tried to have another approach than his predecessors, Benedict and also John Paul II, were a little bit more sticking to traditionalists and conservative views in the church. And he also set on the very first day that example that we often talk about. He refused to have this stola with a golden brocade and whatever it was, this Baroque outfit. He didn't want that. He never wore the famous red shoes. He moved into Santa Marta, the guest house of the Vatican, which is a modest 2-star hotel, you could say. And he was not moving into the Apostolic Palace, which is a nice building at St. Peter's Square. So he set out an example. He wanted to show modesty, and he also demanded that the church would be modest. If that in the end changed things, we have to see, because his successor, his predecessor, his successor, sorry, it's very likely that he will move in the Apostolic Palace again. So he did not change the rules. Everybody can choose where he wants to live and what he wants to wear. But he somehow, he shook up the rules and tried to change also the behavior of the Curia. That was a little bit difficult. There's still an infight between the conservative arm and the progressive arm in the church. He also reformed the Vatican Bank, which was involved in shady businesses in the 80s and 90s. So he changed a lot of things there. And people who worked with him said he appeared to be very soft to the outside, but he could also be very strict to the inside and then take really tough decisions to reform the Vatican within.
Okay. So he tried to be available to the common man as much as possible, but also part of his role as Pope is, with the stature of that office, to mingle with and try and influence world leaders. And we saw at the beginning of his papacy in 2013 that he kind of rose to that office at the same time as world leaders like Barack Obama and Angela Merkel were in office, who largely shared his worldview when it comes to democracy, when it comes to human rights. I say largely, we can get into that, but generally in that direction. Now, upon his death, we're seeing that governments in the US and Europe are growing more authoritarian. It could be argued that anti-migrant tendencies are on the rise. So did he then exist as a lone voice in the world, standing for some of these more liberal values?
Well, the Pope is not only an elected monarch. He's also not a very powerful person, but he has a kind of a moral authority, and he uses that normally to also be the diplomat-in-chief for the Catholic believers, for the Catholic Church. It is difficult at times because now he has to keep a distance to all these right-wing governments in Europe and also in America that also try to somehow capitalize on the Catholic values and take them as a reason for their own political behavior. So it was always difficult for him to handle that. But, for example, he visited, as the first Pope ever, the G7 summit in Italy. And he gave a lecture that was basically on also moral values, but also on climate change. And he talked to these leaders on eye to eye on the same level. He even cracked some jokes with them. That was also part of the Pope. Actually, he had some sense of humor. He had two speeches prepared, one long and one short. He held them both up, and it was in the afternoon. The people were already tired. He said, "Shall I do the long one, or shall I do the short one?" And they all laughed like you and said, "Oh, the short one is fine." He said, "I can also convey my message shortly, and you know what I mean." So he tried to connect to these people. And when it comes to world affairs, of course, he was always voicing that Russia should stop its war in Ukraine. He also took a stand in the Middle East conflict. He said, of course, the terror attacks by Hamas are wrong, but also how Israel now is waging the war against Hamas is also not in order. So he was trying to talk to both sides and to give it a little bit of a chance to get to some solution.
How influential was that voice, though? He is a moral authority, but how much did he really affect when it
look
comes...
at the wars, they're still going on, so he was not very successful in that sense. But I think he always reminded people, or tried to remind them, that there's some higher meaning or some sense that has to be regarded, and he tried to keep up at least the moral approach. And
And I think maybe on a much smaller scale, or we're talking about his emphasis on the common man. We know that he held nightly phone calls with people in Gaza and who were sheltering in the Catholic Church there.
That's right. He would FaceTime with them. I think until 2 days. I read somewhere 2 days before his death, he was FaceTiming with the Seoul Catholic Church in Gaza and asking them how they were. He seems to be a particular focus on food as well. He was asking them what they were eating that day, which is like a very important question too. So he really did try and keep up that connection there.
So only we can know, we can't know. Only the people who spoke to him personally can know what kind of influence that is, to have someone who has such a world platform calling you personally every night to see how you're doing. I think that says a lot. But as you were saying, those wars are still going on.
Yeah, but this is also the point. He felt like a priest or like a shepherd for this parish in Gaza, so he called them.
One other thing I want to go into, you were talking earlier about kind of the doctrinal changes and some of the pushes for doctrinal change that Francis came up against. And again, very early on in his papacy, there was a very famous moment on board an airplane with journalists. And let's see, I'm not sure exactly where he was going, but this was a statement he made that was very shocking to many and very welcome to many, coming from a Catholic Pope. So let's listen to this O-tone. Dustin, if you could play that for us.
Se una persona è gay e cerca il Signore e ha buona volontà, ma chi sono io per giudicarla?
So he said, if a person is gay, who am I to judge? Why was that such a shocking statement from a Catholic Pope?
Well, it was a nice sentence in the eye of many people that feel for the LGBTQ plus community, but the sentence didn't change so much on the ground. To be gay or lesbian or whatever is still a sin and the Catholic teaching. He didn't change that. He also held traditional views on sex change and also this approach to sexual behavior and sexual roles. It's a double-edged sword, actually, because he also had to look at the parts of the Catholic church in the world. In Africa, for example, the Catholic Church is very conservative. They don't want anything to do with gay or lesbian rights and stuff like that. He actually reprimanded the bishops in Ghana who are still supporting death penalty for gays. So he said that's not possible. On the other hand, he also said to Italian bishops, there's already enough gayness in your seminars, so please don't take openly gay people into these seminars and educate them to become a priest. He later apologized for this. And now in Italy, it's now possible that, gays also apply to become a priest, but it's, the official policy is still not so LGBT plus positive. He said that. As I said before, he tried to initiate a discussion and change, but in the end, he did not go through with it. So this is still, this not only the case in this field, also many other fields.
And that's sort of interesting. I can sort of link into comments here before I guess we move to our next guest. But so someone is saying here, to understand the legacy of the Pope, there are matters being discussed among religious conservatives that would have been considered taboo a few decades ago. I guess queer rights being one of them. Someone else has written, though, we need to sort of discuss how much influence the very conservative wing of the Catholic Church does have.
I just forgot to mention that he allowed the blessing of gay relationships, actually, which is also new in the Church, under certain circumstances. And these circumstances are now defined by the national bishop conferences. So all over the world is different now, how they, do these gay blessings or don't. So this is also an example, therefore, that he was not consequential in this stuff. And now I forgot the question, sorry.
No,
just wanted to add this.
Someone was just saying that, I guess what you were saying about how much change really was effective, and you're saying not a lot. Someone's written talking really about the influence that the conservative wing of the church...
Just that it's actually a part of the conversation is a big deal.
Exactly.
Right. He changed the style of conversation and also this approach with the synods to let people talk. But the resistance from the conservative camp in the Catholic Church is very, very strong, especially in, as I said, in Africa and also Latin America, also some parts of Europe. So he felt this resistance, and one of his duties as Pope is also to keep the universal Catholic Church together. It's a universal approach, so it should be the same on the whole flock everywhere, regardless where they are. So this is also a big challenge to keep this together.
There's a big divide, isn't there?
It's really difficult, and but there are also. People always say he is a reformist, but also there are some people that say in his heart he had these traditional values also. He was an 88-year-old man, educated in another time, so he had difficulties actually with gender policies and all these things we have heard about in the last years. He was trying to adapt, but he was not so convinced maybe as some critics wanted him to be.
Well, we're going to talk next to someone who worked with the Pope personally and who can talk about him as a leader. And I would like to bring in Stan Chu Ilo, Professor Stan Chu Ilo. Welcome to the program. You are an associate professor at DePaul University, studying many things, including African Christianity, as well as an ordained priest. You were ordained in your home country of Nigeria. You have told me, though, I can just call you Stan. So, welcome to the program.
Hi, Stan. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
You're very welcome. First of all, I would like to ask you your impressions of Pope Francis as a leader, because you did work with him personally. So can you tell us about that experience and what you think of him as a man?
First of all, is that Pope Francis is a Christian at heart, who embraced the gospel message of love of God and love of neighbor. He also is a Christian who embodied in his own life his own experiences. He suffered a lot. As you know, he only was living with one lung, as it were. And then if you look at the testament he made, the last sentence there is, the suffering of my life I dedicate for peace and for the good of the world. So we talk about these important persons as if they are just from somewhere else. At core is a man who feels intimately the mercy of God, who feels that his life he owes to God's graciousness. And then, out of that conviction, as we see in his motto, that in loving me, God had mercy on me, he feels that that is what we should give to every human being, is mercy, compassion, love, kindness, accompany them, listen to them. And so he makes you feel that you are the only person that mattered, even in moments when he was down and out. This is a man who cared so much. I mean, like Bernd was talking earlier, that even few days before his death, he was calling the people in Gaza. I remember 2 years ago when we went to meet him, he had seen so many people. He was already tired that he couldn't even shake my hand. He just smiled. But as he was wheeled out, he was shaking hands with people on wheelchair.
Wow.
That's the man.
Yeah. So he is a man who obviously showed that he wanted to reach out to people who needed care. But he also was the shepherd of a church of 1.3 to 4 billion people. He can't do it all. So he had to lead that church. And you were a part of how he wanted to move in a new direction. So can you tell us about how you worked with him on mapping out a vision for part of the future of the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I worked with him with a vision. Pope Francis got a mandate from the cardinals when he was elected Pope. They gave him a mandate to reform the church. The church was really in a deep crisis. That led to the Pope Benedict resigning. There was sexual abuse scandal. There was the Vatican scandal. There was the intrigues within the Vatican for power, horse trading. The church was losing credibility in the world. It was indeed a cesspool of corruption. I'm sorry to say that, but the crisis was so much that the cardinals wanted someone who would clean up the mess. So he went about this with single-mindedness. Pope Francis, I wanted to call him St. Francis. Pope Francis is a tough leader. He went about this. I mean, for the first time, bishops were dismissed, cardinals were put on trials. He was not someone that you would say was soft with the systems and institutions that, if you look at his programmatic document, Evangelii Gaudium, he said all the structures must be towards missionary conversion. We need to change the church so that the church can focus not on itself, not on power, not on privileges, but on the poor, which is the primary mission of the church. So that was what some of us who were invited, for instance, I was invited to be the North American coordinator of the project doing theology from the existential peripheries. During the synod, we were sent to meet migrants in borders, to meet prisoners, to meet the elderly, to meet LGBTQ and people who have left the church. And that, for me, when we presented that report to him, that was part of the reason the synod was meant to have lasted for 1 year, the last synod. It was when they saw the massive, when Pope Francis was told by Cardinal Prevost, the prefect for the dicastery for bishops, the extent of what was uncovered. He felt we needed an additional year, and now we have another year to actually understand the pains and wounds and brokenness of humanity.
Yes, I want to talk about that a little bit later as a challenge that the next Pope will face, because that is work that is undone. I still want to talk for a minute about the vision that Pope Francis saw for places where the Catholic Church is growing, like South America and like Africa. There's actually a moment I want to play for you from a visit he made to the Democratic Republic of Congo. He could have talked about many things, but he chose to talk about this subject that we'll show you right now.
Tutti insieme diciamo pas de corruzione.
Tous ensemble disons pas de corruption.
So he's saying no corruption, and the crowd is cheering in this huge stadium where they're listening to the Pope. No to corruption, the Pope is asking them to chant.
And he's trying to get them to cheer even more.
Yeah, he's got his arms up.
His arms up.
Give me more noise.
Yeah. So Pope Francis was uncomfortable with power. He understood the very difficult challenges the world faces with the abuse of authority in the church as well as in politics. He was very uncomfortable with corruption in Africa, corruption in the church, corruption everywhere. He sees the global economy as an economy that kills people. So it is not surprising if you studied his theology. His theology is what we call theology of the people. He talks about the church and authority as an inverted pyramid. So those on the top should be those on the base. It is about the people. In Fratelli Tutti, he makes it clear that to be a person is to belong to a people, to belong to a community. Therefore, I think for us in Africa, this is so painful to realize that, for instance, in South Sudan, Pope Francis stooped down to kiss the feet of Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, the two main feuding parties in this very prolonged conflict, killing so many people in South Sudan. It's painful that after all these gestures, we still have more than 500,000 people displaced in South Sudan. So yes, corruption in Congo. Congo, the history of Congo is a history of corruption, exploitation, and violence. And these are the things that Pope Francis tried as much as he can to emphasize, that these violence and wars are not the will of God. These are as a result of human greed, selfishness, and abuse of power and authority.
Stan, Jared Reed here. I just wanted to read you out a comment from one of our audiences, and I guess the theme of the past few minutes is Pope Francis speaking out against corruption. Someone is saying it's a little bit much to speak out of no corruption from one of the most corrupt institutions in the world. I guess they're referring to the Catholic Church here. I'd be interested in your response to that.
Yes, I think that the writer is right to condemn the corruption in the Catholic Church, but I don't agree that it is the most corrupt institution in the world.
It says one of the most. One of the most.
Yeah, one of the most. I'm not very sure about the stats, but indeed there is corruption. There is corruption, we know, in the church. I have been also in international humanitarian work, and I have seen that as well. But Pope Francis is not corrupt. Pope Francis is only one person, and his message has been for the church to clean up itself, because you cannot be preaching about truth, justice, about equity, honesty, and transparency when what you're doing is a total contradiction of this. So yes, and I must say that Pope Francis was really not very popular among the high-ranking, some of the most high-ranking church cardinals or even bishops. I must tell you this, that his greatest opposition is from within. That's why you will see that he rejected all the pomp and pageantry of the Vatican. So he's actually anti-Vatican, and this is a contradiction. Yeah. So he's anti all these institutional practices and culture that perpetuated the corruption that your viewer indicated in that note.
And he, as you said, was trying to clean house, but also steer the future of the church, it seems, as much as he could from who's going to make those decisions, who will be the next pope. We know that he appointed many cardinals and from different places from around the world than traditionally had been the case. And Michaela, I know you've got some information to help us understand kind of what a sea change this was in terms of who now will be in charge of choosing his successor and directing the church and taking it in the direction that Francis likely hoped that it would go.
That's right, yeah. Maybe we should just dive right in and take a look at this dashboard. So the Vatican has a dashboard that sort of lays out all of the College of Cardinals. And so the College of Cardinals are those who elect the next pope, which will be coming, that will be happening in 15 to 20 days. I think we have a date.
So I'm just scared here, though. This is in Italian. Are you going to help us understand, those of us who don't?
Ciao to all. Let's see. We'll see what I can do, okay? But please be gentle if I don't quite translate exactly everything correctly. But okay, let's walk through this. So here, can we see my mouse? Yes. Up here we have the number of cardinals, the total number of cardinals. There are 252 cardinals. And so one sort of eccentricity, or perhaps it's very straightforward, but only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote can elect the Pope. So that brings us down. There are a number of cardinals over 80, so that brings us down to the number of, what do we call it, elector cardinals is 135. So, and I mean, let me just refer to my notes here. I know that we have some figures on the number of cardinals that Pope Francis actually brought in. And Brent, you probably have this at the top of your head.
A bit over 100 or something.
108.
108.
108.
Elector.
108.
108, thank you,
And that's
Stan.
elector cardinals,
Actually, now
right?
it's only 133 because 2 got 80 in the last 2 days or something.
They both had birthdays.
Oh,
Okay, well, this
what is the
This is
rule
what I
about
read, but
voting?
This is Santa Sede, so they should be correct.
what is the rule about voting?
Yeah, to be able to vote, what's the rule?
Oh, to be able, well, you mean you have to be under 80.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah.
So
have
they
to be
fell
under
out
80.
of the electorate. That's
So-
why.
Right,
Okay.
So they're sort of, cruising until retirement, I guess.
Right.
So then, let's see here. So let's talk about the breakdown. When Pope Francis came in 2013, there was the majority of elector cardinals were from Europe. Currently, it is just under a majority that are from Europe. Let's see, and here we have, so this is, in this top right corner, we have the number of cardinals per continent, and this is both elector.
These are total numbers,
This is total,
right?
exactly.
Not elector cardinals.
Yeah, so still, based on total numbers, we do have, far and away the highest number of cardinals are from Europe.
Right.
Then we have Asia has a significant chunk of cardinals as well.
Just so everyone knows, I put the link in the chat, so if you want to follow
cool.
along, then feel
Yeah,
free.
it's worth scrolling through because you can also check by country. Let's see here. I clicked on Canada.
I just want to
earlier.
add, DeVos here in the chat said, you have to be under 80, but also a man. That is also an important distinction.
And Catholic.
And Catholic.
But that's actually the only rule, right? Because we were talking about this earlier. Any man can become pope. Any Catholic man can become pope.
Is that true, Stan? Is that true? You don't have to be a cardinal to become pope, right?
Yes, you don't have to. You don't have to.
Yeah, in theory, but since 1342,
Right.
all the popes have been cardinals.
Exactly.
So I don't think that they will break this rule this time.
So my question is, did Francis stack the deck in a way with who he chose as cardinals?
I'm not sure if we would describe it as stacking the deck, but he did. He put in 108 elector cardinals. Let's see, and so when he was elected, it was a slight majority of voting cardinals who were European, and this time around, Europe comprises about 39% of the electorate, And then we have 17% of voting cardinals who are from Asia. And from North America, there are 15% of the voting cardinals, and then 13% each from South America and from Africa. So it's quite dramatically different from what it looked like in 2013.
Bernd, what does that say to you, the way the cardinal electors have changed?
You still need a two-third majority, so you have to form coalitions to get this. And many cardinals say God does not know east, west, north or south. So they want to say that this voting is not about countries or regions. It's more about maybe the mission they think about, or the traditional values or the progressive values. But of course, it's true that the importance of the European cardinals is going down. Fun fact, the Germans only have 3 cardinals now that will vote. They had 6 the last time, and there was nobody appointed from Francis from Germany. So you can see this as an indication that, of course, the Europeans are not that valuable anymore. But there are still, I think, 47 cardinals alone from Italy. So because the Curia is represented there. But only 20 of them can vote, so the rest is too old. And Pope Francis went out to the edges of the world, as I said, to appoint cardinals from there and to take in cardinals that have not been known so far from countries that nobody regarded as important so far. So the college is changing. And there are actually more cardinals than foreseen. And there's a rule that only 120 should vote. There's an old rule book written by John Paul II. But he overstepped that and said, well, we will have more cardinals this time. So, but it's very hard to calculate actually what will happen. Polling the cardinal college is very difficult, and the dynamics are very hard to predict. So we will see. And for example, nobody had, or not many had Bergoglio actually on the list in 2013 when he was voted for. So because he was so old, that's also a criterion. You don't elect an old cardinal where you can expect that he will die in only a few years, and you don't elect a cardinal too young. Then you have the effect as John Paul II, who was elected when he was 58 or something. So he was there for over 20 years, and people don't want that either. So somebody who can serve 10 years, that's fine.
What are anybody's?
Yeah, I mean...
We're going to do a chat check in a second, maybe.
Yeah, people, I mean, it's interesting, and people are sort of, the way you're sort of describing maybe, I guess, some of the intrigues going around, you know, who's voting for whom and the two-thirds majority and how people align together.
Yeah, there's an election campaign going on already.
Exactly.
So.
People are, I don't know if people have watched the film Conclave, but someone's written it's starting to look a bit like a documentary. So
I did watch that. Well, I doubt we'll have the twist at the end. But
there are many things true, but not the end. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Stan, please stay with us because we want to talk with you more about the challenges that Francis's successor will likely face. First, we're going to do more of a chat check with Cherry Chan. What are people saying? What's the vibe there?
We see a lot of respect and positive views of Pope Francis. For example, we have Defoe saying that he showed humility, and Carolina said he's a people's pope, a very loyal viewer. Thank you for the comment. And we also have Neely saying that every leader is elevated on whether he left the organization in a better condition than he found it. On that metric, Pope did a good job. So we have seen quite positive view of the Pope. But also there are a lot of questions and speculation on who could be the next Pope, which I think we will talk about, or we have already talked a bit about how the next Pope will be elected. But there's one comment by Defoe that I think you have also mentioned, but he did say that, assuming that it's a man, not a woman, right? So, yeah, that's a bit of criticism of the organization.
I think that's safe to say that it will likely be a man who will lead the Catholic Church next, Stan. I think you would agree. But Stan, I want to go back to you. We have seen over the past century that Catholicism is growing. And it's not growing in the global north, its traditional seat like Europe and North America. It is growing in the global south, in places like Latin America and Africa. At the same time, there are diverging social values between the global north and the global south. And so I'm wondering if we get a pope who might want to continue with Francis's progressive stance, and then you've got factions of leaders in the Catholic Church and Catholics themselves who want more of a conservative stance on social issues. Is there a risk of a schism in the global Catholic Church?
Well, I think that we have to be careful, in terms of these categorization of liberals and conservatives, and this categorization of growth in the global South and decline in the global North. I have actually contended that the center of Christianity is not to be determined simply by demographics. I work with so many, like Missio in Germany and with bishops in Germany, and I have insisted this idea that Christianity is dying in Europe is, we have to be careful, because Christianity is not Christendom. This is the problem. People with a Christendom ideal think of Christianity, and Pope Francis insisted it's not about dominating spaces. It's about transforming lives. It's not about ritualism and formalism. It is about a way of life that Pope Francis says attracts people to something bigger than themselves. And so when you think of Christianity in Africa, we think of growth. I have said, yes, the church is growing in number, but Africa is also growing in poverty, is growing in violence, is growing in collapse of political, economic, and social networks. So we really have to think of the next Pope as someone who appreciates what Pope Francis already started to do. That is decentralization. So when you had the synodal path in Germany, I know it was a big issue with Pope Francis and the German Catholic bishops over, are they going too far? Are they going it alone? But that, for me, demonstrates what the future looks like. Catholicism gets...
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to pick up on something you said. You had talked about the need for the Catholic Church to adapt to cultures of local areas where they need the Catholic Church, rather than the Catholic Church saying this is what you should be and this is how you should act, that the Catholic Church adapts to cultures and needs. So can you give me an example of a way that the Catholic Church needs to adapt to local culture to better serve worshipers?
Yeah, so that's actually what Pope Francis began with decentralization. He says that every solution should not be sought from the Pope. It's not everything, the Pope this, the Pope that. An example would be a very, very critical one and controversial one is LGBTQ, right? There are countries that have accepted in their national law same-sex marriage. There are countries that actually have in their own national law have criminalized it. Now is a very clear example. There are countries that, like in Germany, where women are already exercising some forms of authority in the church, preaching in churches. So in Africa, we have women who are still struggling to actually get away from the stranglehold of patriarchy, even to breathe. So if you say in Africa, let women become deacons, you will not have candidates who are trained. That's what I mean. The Catholic Church cannot be a church where everything is centralized. So you can allow local bishops working with God's people to determine pathways to meet the contextual pastoral challenge that they face.
Yeah, but can I push back on that a little bit? Because, so there is a hierarchy in the Catholic Church, and only men are allowed to be clergy. So you are bringing up issues that women have expressed to you, that they want to be more active in the Catholic Church. And some women in Germany have found the way to do that, and some women in Africa have not. But how can sometimes there needs to be top-down leadership, and there's expected to be top-down leadership in a church. How can the Catholic Church make decisions, good decisions, about women and about their bodies, beyond just being in clergy, but on abortion, on birth control, if there are no women leaders who are decision makers in the Catholic Church, how can they direct that the status of women is improved without women leaders?
Yeah, you're talking to you're talking to someone who personally, what you've said pains me. It worries me, and that's why I think that it is not something that's going to be changed by just a pope making a law, but rather, like what I am doing in Africa is that we formed a network. In our network, we have women who are leaders. Now, the Catholic Church, and it must be stated clearly, this is my thinking as a theologian, changes in the Catholic Church that have sticked were not simply the result of what a pope said or did. Even the Christian movement started by Jesus was not really hierarchical. Jesus' Christianity was not mainstream when it began. So I think that we need coalition in the church among across the aisle. People, theologians, pastoral workers, activists, to put pressure for the church to change, because those who are on top will preserve their power. They will try to maintain the institutional narrative. Pope Francis tried to push the button, but I can tell you, he faced strong resistance. I have never seen this kind of, even cardinals writing the Dubier, condemning him. So it is not easy to change the Catholic Church, but he did it. He didn't change anything, but he has initiated a process that I think that will be hard for the successor to simply throw away and begin or take us back to a restorationist agenda.
So, Stan, another challenge that the next pope will face that Francis unfortunately did not appear to be able to solve is the issue of sexual abuse by clergy. We know that last October there was a report by the commission appointed by the Pope himself in 2014 that said the Catholic Church still was not doing enough to adequately address sexual abuse by clergy. SNAP, which is an organization of survivors, actually called Pope Francis's papacy a preventable catastrophe for the children and vulnerable people who were abused during his tenure. So we know that sexual abuse by clergy is still happening. Cover-ups are still happening. What does the next pope need to do to change this and address this adequately?
Yeah, the fact that we have this terrible incidents, I mean, it makes me shameful as a Catholic priest. It pains me. I have read some of the reports, the one from Africa. It is very, very heart-wrenching. I think, in fairness to Pope Francis, that he has done more than any other pope. He has taken the most radical steps by issuing the document on the process, the protocol, and making it quicker and easier to dismiss priests who have been accused and found guilty of clerical sexual abuse. The process that he introduced was not even accepted by some people within the system. Is now a process that cardinals, the Cardinal McCarrick here was dismissed from clerical state. Yes, it's going to take time for a century-old pattern and behavior to change. But the next pope must, like Pope Francis, courageously, without minding whose ox is gored, take this document, this legislation by Pope Francis, and implement it. Because, and that's my last point here, the Pope is in Rome. I think that one of the things people don't understand is how the Catholic Church works. Every bishop is like a boss in his own diocese. They make a law, the Pope has made this law, but you still see bishops who are not implementing it. You still see even some laity, because of this learned helplessness. I call it, learned helplessness within the system. People are still, like in places like Africa or in Asia, they still have deference for bishops, or when priests do something, you try to hide it and cover it. So the training is ongoing. Also, Pope Francis reformed the training of pastoral agents. The Ratio Fundamentalis, the document for training of priests, also involves a training now on prevention, because we're thinking about those who have been hurt. The point is that some of the men in this system still have this mindset of what is good for the church is to protect clericalism, which Pope Francis calls a cancer, and also episcopalism, the idea that bishops and priests, they belong to a different class, they can get away with anything. This is not what Jesus wants. This is not what Pope Francis wants. And remember what happened in Chile, where Pope Francis, insisted the whole bishop of the entire country resigned because Pope Francis outed them, sent visitors to go and look at what happened. We know, like the other group, the Legionaries of Christ, again, under Pope Francis, these things have been brought to into the open, and he did not waste time in dismissing any person who was found guilty with this stench that I think is really making it impossible for so many people. I did the job for Pope Francis. We went to talk to people that had been violated. Some of them, they wept. I wept with them. I wept with LGBTQ members here in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico. I wept with women who were violated, even by clergy. So I am heartbroken. And this is something that I think, if the Catholic Church does not address, if the next Pope does not confront this with courage, determination, we will not be talking about the church as we know it today, because many people are leaving. Yeah. Look at what happened in Germany, for instance.
Dan, I just wanted to sort of jump in, because you're sort of talking about what is a pretty tricky balance, right? Because someone's written here talking about reform versus tradition, and they're saying it's the issue every religious leader faces. If you go too far with reforms, you risk damaging the institutions, and if you don't go far enough, then you stifle the institution.
Yeah. Stan, thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we could keep the conversation going. We'll have to have you back another time, perhaps when we know who the next Pope is. But Stan, thank you so much for joining the stream today. And we wish you peace and love, as you wrote to us in your email to us when we invited you on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's about time to wrap things up, but I'd like to go back to you, Bernd. You're kind of sitting in the realm of world politics. And if we look at what Pope Francis said when he opened his papacy, that he wanted the Catholic Church to be a field hospital after a battle. My final question to you is, isn't preventing a war going to save more lives than being there to clean up the mess afterwards? So should the next Pope, or can the next Pope, do more to mediate global conflicts that we're seeing today?
Oh, that's a hard question. I mean, there have been popes that tried that. John Paul II tried to mediate more than Francis did, but the conflicts that are now are raging are so complicated. I don't know if a pope actually, as a Catholic priest, can do much except offering to talk to both sides. I mean, he does not have worldly powers, actually. And I'm afraid most of the authoritarian leaders that are doing these things will not listen to him. So it might be a nice, or it might be a good effort to just try it. The next Pope would also have nothing to lose if he tries it. But I think you would overestimate, actually, the influence of a Pope. He can only be a moral authority and always say you have to do this or that and be peaceful and avoid conflicts, but really actually actively negotiating or mediating, I think that would be a step too far.
Right. So nothing to lose. Doesn't seem like the next Pope could be fired.
No, that's a good thing about this job. You can't be fired. There's nobody upon you. You are an absolute monarch. So you are elected, but then you are not eligible to anybody. There's no parliament. There's nobody. I mean, that's a good thing, and that's why many cardinals actually want to be Pope because it's a nice job.
And you get to speak your mind. So thank you so much, Bernd, for joining us today. Everybody can check out the poll in the comments. We've got the results there.
That's right, and we will be back next week. Of course, next Wednesday. We'll let you know on Tuesday, about a day before the stream starts, what the topic's going to be. It's going to be an exciting one, of course. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating today, sending in your questions and your comments. And as Michelle said, the results of the poll you can see on the stream now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We'll see you next week.